In today's video, we're examining 5 couples who were mauled by deadly predators, from a brown bear's rampage in Montana's wilderness to a bull shark's brutal assault in Thailand's waters. But first we begin in South Africa, where a British couple's dream safari would become their final moments together. It was June 18, 2015, in Kruger National Park, South Africa. Evening light was beginning to fade, the dry winter air cooling as tourists settled into open jeeps for the last drive of the day. The grasslands were calm, but beneath the quiet, unseen eyes of predators watched, waiting for the moment dusk would give them. Robert Jenkins, 39, and his wife Angela, 36, had flown in from Leeds after years of careful saving. Robert worked long shifts as a warehouse supervisor, reliable and respected, but seldom able to take extended leave. Angela was a part-time teaching assistant at a local primary school, quiet and warm with children. The safari was a trip they had spoken about for nearly a decade, an adventure they wanted to experience before starting a family. Neither had much background in wildlife, but both carried cameras and guidebooks, eager to capture every moment. They chose Kruger for its reputation as one of Africa's premier reserves, where lions, elephants, and rhinos could be seen within a single drive. Their tour operator stressed safety rules during the briefing: no sudden movements, no dangling limbs, and no leaning out of the open vehicles. Robert followed carefully, attentive to every instruction. Angela, more excitable, often leaned closer for photographs, trusting the guides to manage any risk. It was understandable. After days of routine work back home, the sight of lions so near was extraordinary. Dust clung to the jeep's frame as the group rolled slowly down a dirt track, the driver halting when he spotted a pride of lions resting in the shade. A young male lifted its head, ears twitching, while 2 lionesses sprawled nearby. The guide spoke in low tones about their behavior, explaining how prides were territorial and how lions, though often appearing lazy in daylight, could spring into action without warning. Lions are apex predators, weighing 300 to 500 pounds, capable of reaching bursts of 35 miles per hour. Their jaws, delivering more than 600 pounds of bite force, are designed to crush windpipes or sever arteries. In safari parks, they are accustomed to vehicles, but still instinctively react to movement. Guides repeat one rule often: animals see the jeep as a whole shape, not individuals, until someone breaks the silhouette. That distinction is what keeps tourists safe, and what can turn fatal if ignored. On this evening, the guide cautioned again not to lean out. Yet, as the lions lay only 20 feet away, Angela raised her camera, edging forward and angling through the side of the jeep for an unobstructed shot. The build-up was brief but tense. Robert whispered for her to sit back, but she lingered, adjusting the lens. The guide had begun to speak again when the young male lion shifted, crouching low in the grass. Tourists noticed the ripple of its muscles, the focused stare, and the sudden silence among the pride. Within seconds, it closed the gap in a burst of speed. The lion clamped onto Angela's arm, wrenching her partly out of the jeep. As she screamed, Robert jumped down from the open side of the vehicle in a frantic attempt to pull her free. The guide shouted for him to stay inside, but instinct had already taken over. The movement put him directly on the ground, exposed. A lioness seized the opening, lunging at his side and toppling him into the dirt. The male released Angela long enough to fasten onto Robert's shoulder, and together the 2 lions dragged him away from the vehicle. Angela fell beside the jeep, struggling as the male returned to her, locking on her throat. Robert, pinned by the lioness, tried to rise but was quickly overwhelmed, his cries drowned by the roars and the sound of tearing. Blood streaked the jeep's frame as tourists cried out. The guide leaned on the horn and accelerated sharply forward, forcing dust and noise across the pride. The lions hesitated but did not immediately retreat. When the jeep moved a short distance away, the passengers sat stunned, listening to muffled cries from the grass before the sounds faded. The driver radioed camp immediately, reporting a double fatality, and was told to return without delay. Rangers organized a patrol to the site. Back at camp, shaken tourists were given time to calm down before being asked for statements. Rangers reached the location later that night, finding the couple's remains in trampled grass marked by paw prints and blood spray. What could be gathered was carefully removed for transport. The lions were not pursued. The park classified the attack as provoked by human error rather than rogue behavior. The aftermath was quiet and grim. The incident reached international news briefly, but was soon overshadowed by broader stories. Robert and Angela's bodies were flown back to the UK, where a private service was held with family and close friends. In Kruger, the safari company revised its briefings, emphasizing again the single rule broken that night: never lean out of the jeep. As the African savanna claimed more victims in a moment of misplaced trust, in Montana, a camping hunting trip would transform into a nightmare when a massive brown bear caught the scent of their evening meal. It was August 2nd, 2014, in Glacier National Park, Montana. The trails near Avalanche Lake carried the usual summer flow of families and day hikers, boots crunching on gravel and voices fading quickly into forest. For David and Maria, the weekend was meant to be an escape, not a confrontation with danger. David Martinez was 42, a plumber from Billings who worked long shifts with steady hands and quiet patience. He was the type who kept to routines: early mornings, packed lunches, late evenings spent fixing small things around the house. Hiking offered him a way to step away from work and give his son, Lucas, moments that felt adventurous. The outdoors was not unfamiliar to him, but he had little experience with large predators beyond passing news stories. Maria, 38, worked as a dental assistant. She was known by co-workers as careful and soft-spoken, rarely missing a shift. She and David had married young and built their lives quietly, raising Lucas in a small home on the edge of town. The trip was her suggestion, a way to close out summer before school began. They carried day packs, snacks, water, and a camera, choosing the popular trail for its reputation as family-friendly. Glacier's terrain in late summer was vibrant with berries. Thimbleberries, huckleberries, and serviceberries lined parts of the trail, a draw for hikers and wildlife alike. Rangers warned visitors to hike in groups, make noise on blind corners, and stay alert for fresh scat or overturned shrubs, signs that bears were feeding nearby. Still, encounters could come suddenly, with only seconds to react. Grizzly bears are among the most formidable animals in North America, with sows weighing between 300 and 500 pounds, powerfully muscled and fiercely protective of their cubs. Unlike predatory attacks, defensive encounters happen fast and without hesitation, often triggered when people appear too close. The Martinez family moved along the narrow dirt track around midday. Lucas, 8, walked between his parents, pointing at chipmunks darting across the rocks. The air carried the smell of pine and the rustle of wind in the understory. As they rounded a sharp bend bordered by berry thickets, movement erupted ahead. A grizzly sow lifted her head only a few yards off the trail, two cubs scattering behind her. There was no time for retreat. The bear lunged forward in a defensive rush, huffing and snapping her jaws. David pushed Lucas behind him and spread his arms, shouting, but the sow closed the gap in seconds. Her paw struck his chest, knocking him flat onto his back. The impact drove the wind out of him, and before he could rise, her jaws clamped into his shoulder with crushing force. Maria screamed and grabbed for her son, pulling him a step back down the trail. The sow pivoted, ears back, and charged again. She struck Maria low, claws cutting across her leg and dragging her sideways into the brush. The cubs bawled from the trees, adding to the frenzy. Hikers farther down the trail later said they first heard the screams and crashing brush before catching glimpses of the struggle as they came closer. David tried to rise, blood soaking his shirt, but the bear was already on Maria. She raked down across her torso, biting repeatedly in quick, brutal bursts, meant to neutralize a threat. Maria's cries grew faint as the sow shook her once, then dropped her to the ground. Lucas, frozen in shock, stood only feet away. Hikers coming uphill shouted and clapped, trying to drive the bear off. The sow paused, standing over the bodies, before gathering her cubs and retreating into the undergrowth. The entire attack lasted well under a minute. When rescuers arrived, they found David dead at the scene from massive trauma to his upper body. Maria was alive but unresponsive, bleeding heavily from her wounds. She was carried by stretcher down the trail, but she died before reaching the trailhead. Lucas was physically unhurt, but in deep shock, repeating to rangers how the bear came from nowhere. The recovery was quiet and somber. Rangers closed the trail, setting up warning signs and urging hikers to avoid berry thickets where bears were actively feeding. They confirmed the attack as defensive, triggered by the family's sudden appearance around the blind corner. The sow and cubs were not pursued. Lucas was placed in the care of relatives, beginning therapy in the weeks that followed. His statement became the central account of the event, describing the speed and force of the encounter. The funeral was private, with only extended family present. Yet even as the Montana wilderness echoed with the final screams, Lucas's parents, halfway across the world in India, a pair would disturb something far more deadly than memories among the ancient stones. A king cobra coiled in the shadows. It was May 27, 2016, in the Ranthambore district of Rajasthan, India. The morning heat was already oppressive, forcing shade to become the only relief. Among the scattered ruins and dry scrub, two young people from Jaipur entered a place that locals had long avoided. By afternoon, what began as a casual weekend trip would end in an irreversible tragedy. Vikram Singh, 29, worked as a motorbike mechanic in the city. He was known among friends for his energy and impatience, always eager to take on new challenges. Despite his modest job, he often sought weekend adventures outside Jaipur, convinced that travel could make up for what he felt was a stagnant routine. His girlfriend, Meera Patel, 26, had recently left a receptionist position and was between jobs. She often accompanied Vikram on these short trips, more to share time with him than from genuine interest in the outdoors. The ruins outside Ranthambore appealed to them both as a change from city streets, a setting for photographs, quiet time, and the novelty of visiting a place they had only heard about. Their decisions were not reckless in intent. They had planned a short walk around the crumbling walls, arriving by motorbike in the late morning with the idea of being back in town before nightfall. So neither carried protective gear, nor did they bring a first aid kit. He believed that with enough care they would be fine, a confidence that made sense from his perspective. Neither had previously encountered danger on their casual trips. The ruins sat among patches of dry grass and thorn scrub. Stone walls casting narrow strips of shade where the air held slightly cooler, favored resting places for the Indian cobra. In India, the Indian cobra is among the big four species responsible for the majority of snakebite deaths. Unlike the king cobra, which is rarely found in Rajasthan, this species thrives in drier farmland and ruined structures. Averaging 4 to 6 feet in length, it carries potent neurotoxic venom that can paralyze muscles and stop breathing if untreated. Fatalities are preventable with anti-venom, but in rural areas far from care, bites can still turn deadly within hours. Most often, only one victim succumbs while another manages to reach treatment, but in this case, neither escaped. That morning, the couple moved from one structure to another, with Vikram leading as Meera followed cautiously. They paused at low walls and broken steps, occasionally taking photos with Vikram's phone. Several signs were visible that they either did not notice or chose not to dwell on. Villagers had told them cobras were common here, but Vikram shrugged this off. He had also seen an old snakeskin near the entrance path, brittle and faded, but assumed it belonged to a smaller species. By early afternoon, as the sun pressed harder, they reached a shaded corner where one stone wall had partially collapsed. To continue further inside, Meera needed to climb the fallen blocks, using her hands to balance as she moved upward. But beneath the shadow of the wall, an Indian cobra lay concealed in the stones. The sudden vibration of footsteps caused it to lift its head, hood flaring in warning. In the same second, Meera stepped down close to where it rested. The strike was immediate. The snake drove its fangs deep into her calf, the force enough to make her cry out and fall backward onto the dirt. Vikram reacted without hesitation. He rushed forward and grabbed at Meera, trying to pull her back. In the confusion, the cobra struck again, this time delivering a shallow bite to his forearm. Both now carried venom in their systems. The shepherd, who had been walking along a distant path, heard the screams and turned toward the sound. From his position, he saw the couple collapse together on the ground, thrashing in the dust. Meera clutched her leg. Within minutes, she began vomiting, her body's muscles seizing violently. Her breathing turned shallow, interrupted by choking gasps as paralysis spread upward. Vikram tried to keep her conscious, but his own arm had begun to swell, and weakness spread quickly through his body. He staggered sideways, legs buckling, then dropped next to her. The shepherd later described how Vikram attempted to rise again, stumbling a few steps before collapsing hard onto the dirt. Meera lay only a few feet away, convulsing with her back arched unnaturally. Her cries became shorter, weaker, until she could no longer produce sound. The cobra had already slipped back into the broken stones, but the shepherd, shaken and terrified it might return, remained at a distance, phoning for help while watching as the struggle slowed. Without access to anti-venom or medical help nearby, their conditions deteriorated. After nearly an hour, Meera's chest movements ceased. Vikram managed to crawl to her side, but his breathing grew ragged and soon stopped as well. By the time word spread to authorities and responders reached the site, the afternoon heat had intensified. They were both declared dead. Their bodies were returned to their families, each household handling the rituals quietly, with neighbors gathering more out of obligation than ceremony. The families never held a joint service. Grief was managed apart, shaped by private customs rather than public statements. For the shepherd, the memory was harder to dismiss. He avoided the path for months, later telling friends that the sound of their collapse stayed with him more than the site itself. And even as the ancient ruins of Rajasthan bore witness to venom's swift takeover, in Madhya Pradesh, a delivery driver and his wife would venture into forbidden territory to gather firewood, unaware that a tiger had already marked them. It was November 10th, 2013, in Bandhavgarh National Park, Madhya Pradesh. Dry leaves carpeted the forest floor, crackling underfoot with every step. In the undergrowth, shadows shifted where sight could not follow, and by nightfall, 2 villagers would vanish into that silence, never returning home. Prakash Gupta, 33, worked as a delivery driver for a small transport company. His days were long, marked by trips between villages, but the pay was modest and often irregular. He was known as dependable, rarely missing a shift, but his income alone was not enough to cover his family's needs. His wife, Suman, 31, kept house and looked after their 3 children. Firewood was still their primary source of fuel, and trips into the forest to collect it were common among poorer families, despite official restrictions. Entering the park without permission carried risk, but for the Guptas, it was a practical necessity, not a matter of choice. The decision to go deeper into the forest that day reflected the growing scarcity of wood closer to the village. Prakash reasoned that if they gathered a larger supply, they could avoid repeated trips for several weeks. Suman agreed, as she often accompanied him both for safety and efficiency. Though villagers often spoke of tigers roaming the area, neither Prakash nor Suman had ever seen one up close. Their calculations were simple. The odds seemed low, and the need was immediate. Bandhavgarh's landscape was a mix of dry, deciduous forest and thick grasslands, intersected by streams that in November had begun to shrink after the monsoon. The scrubby trees and tall grass created countless blind spots, places where sound carried but visibility did not. Even to experienced guides, the terrain could feel claustrophobic. For villagers moving on foot, it was simply dangerous ground. It was also prime territory for tigers, whose movements through these thickets often went unseen until the last moment. Bengal tigers in Bandhavgarh were well known for their territorial behavior. Adult males could weigh over 500 pounds, with jaws strong enough to crush bone and claws that sliced through hide and flesh with ease. They were solitary hunters, relying on stealth and ambush rather than prolonged chases. Attacks on humans were rare but never dismissed. Locals understood that if someone strayed into the wrong stretch of brush at the wrong time, the outcome could be immediate and final. On the day itself, Prakash and Suman stepped over paw prints embedded in soft soil near a dry creek bed. Suman paused briefly, but Prakash urged her onward, convinced they could finish quickly and return before dusk. They each carried bundles of wood as the sun began to drop. 2 other villagers, also collecting firewood nearby, noted the couple moving farther in than usual. What none of them realized was that a Bengal tiger had already closed in, watching from the brush as the pair moved deeper. Hidden in dense brush, the tiger likely waited until the couple turned their backs. One of the villagers who was at the scene later told how it launched with explosive force, covering the short distance in a bound. Prakash was struck first. The impact drove him face first into the ground as the animal's jaws clamped around his neck. The weight of the tiger pinned him instantly, his limbs jerking in brief spasms before going limp. Suman dropped her bundle and grabbed a stick, striking the tiger across its head. The animal wheeled in a blur, its claws raking downward. Witnesses described her face marked by deep parallel gashes, the skin split and bleeding heavily. She staggered back, but the tiger lunged again, knocking her flat. Its jaws clamped onto her torso, teeth sinking into her midsection. Her screams rose in pitch, then broke into choked gasps as the predator shook her body violently. The 2 villagers who watched froze at first, unable to move. The scene made them stumble backward in panic. One shouted and hurled a piece of wood before fleeing. The tiger ignored them, intent on its prey. As they ran, they could still hear Suman's voice weakening, interrupted by the heavy snarls of the animal feeding. When the witnesses returned later with several men from the village, the scene was already stripped. Torn clothing lay in the dirt, soaked with blood. The tiger had dragged portions of the bodies into cover. Nothing more of Prakash and Suman remained visible. The group gathered what little was left, carrying the pieces back with quiet, grim determination. By morning, the community assembled for the funerals. 2 pyres were built side by side at the edge of the village. Their children stood near relatives, too young to fully comprehend but visibly unsettled by the absence. Prayers were recited, the smoke rising slowly into a still sky. The grief carried a subdued anger, directed not at the tiger but at the circumstances that had forced the couple into the forest. A few men set out crude traps at the forest's edge in the days that followed, but the tiger was never seen again. For the villagers, the event was not extraordinary, only devastatingly familiar. This Indian forest floor was stained with the blood of those who trespassed in a tiger's realm. Meanwhile, in Thailand, 2 teachers would wade into murky waters where a bull shark lurked beneath the calm surface. It was April 11, 2016, at Ponce Inlet in Volusia County, Florida, USA. The midday sun beat down on the sand, heat radiating from the shoreline, while the water beyond the surf zone shifted in murky swells. For most visitors, it was another day of holiday leisure, but by the afternoon, the calm routine would be broken by violence. Samantha Reed, 27, was from New Zealand. She worked as a teacher in Orlando, a position she had held for 3 years, known among colleagues as reliable and good with younger students. She often filled her weekends with swimming, describing the water as her relief from city noise. Her partner, Claire Donovan, 28, from Ireland, had moved to Florida the previous year to teach English at the same school. Together, they kept a modest apartment near the city and used school breaks to travel. Their holiday in Volusia County was a short one, a chance to spend quiet time on the coast before returning to work. The 2 women favored water away from crowds, something they often sought on trips. Both were confident swimmers, accustomed to snorkeling, and enjoyed exploring small reefs near beaches. The decision to stay in a beachfront bungalow and swim offshore fit their usual habits. It was their last full day before heading back, and they wanted to make the most of it. Locals had noticed the conditions that morning. Some had spoken of discarded scraps dumped by fishing boats the previous night, carried toward shore by the tide. A man selling drinks near the tree line cautioned that the river mouth was stirring the water too much for safe swimming. Locals knew these stretches of water often drew predators, especially where the river met the sea, and it was in such currents that bull sharks were most likely to roam. This species was not uncommon in such waters. Unlike most sharks, bull sharks could tolerate fresh water and were often found in murky coastal zones where rivers met the sea. Adults averaged between 7 and 11 feet long, with muscular bodies built for sudden bursts of speed. They were opportunistic feeders, relying on ambush and low visibility, and had one of the strongest recorded bite forces of any shark species. For swimmers unaware of their presence, the danger lay in venturing into cloudy water that hid both approach and escape. Other beachgoers stayed close to shore, but Samantha and Claire ignored the concern. After breakfast, they walked barefoot across the sand, laughing as they adjusted their snorkel straps. Around midday, they waded in, moving quickly through waist-deep water until they were about 40 yards offshore. To others watching from the beach, their figures grew small against the shifting surface. By 1:45 p.m., the warnings became reality. Swimmers closer to shore noticed a sudden disturbance beyond them, a swirl and flash of movement under the surface near where the women floated. A large gray shape surged upward, slamming into Samantha from below. She cried out once, the sound sharp against the breeze, as the shark's jaws clamped onto her thigh. Witnesses described her body thrashing, pulled partly under before breaking the surface again. Blood spread in a widening stain. Claire swam toward her, striking at the water with her hands. For a moment, the shark vanished, then surged again, biting deep into Samantha's side. Her voice broke off quickly after a second cry, shock and blood loss silencing her. The sea turned red around them, limbs flailing against turbulence. Claire tried to grab hold of her partner, wrapping an arm across Samantha's shoulders, but the shark's momentum dragged Samantha downward. Likely because Claire clung tightly to her, she was pulled under with her. When they surfaced, Samantha's movements were slowing, her face pale, her mouth likely filling with water as she struggled to breathe. The shark spun back in, striking Claire's calf with a glancing bite before seizing her upper arm. Witnesses saw her body jerk violently as the teeth sank in, tearing muscle open. Blood streamed down her arm in ribbons. She screamed, then kept pulling toward shore, one arm trailing uselessly. Lifeguards sprinted into the surf with a rescue board. From the beach, people pointed and shouted, some wading in knee-deep but stopping as they saw the dark shape circling again. Claire managed to keep her head above water, gasping as lifeguards reached her. They hauled her onto the board, pressing their hands against her arm, where blood pulsed out from a severed artery. She was conscious, lips moving faintly as they paddled for shore, but her skin was pale and her breathing shallow. Behind them, Samantha vanished beneath the murky water. The last sight witnesses reported was her head slipping under, the surface roiling red before closing again. No further movement followed. Claire lost consciousness before the board touched sand. Lifeguards dragged her up the beach, continuing pressure on her wound as calls for an ambulance rang out. Tourists stood frozen in silence, children pulled back by parents. Despite efforts at the medical center in Daytona Beach, she was declared dead within the hour. Samantha's body was recovered later that evening by fishermen who found her caught against a net offshore. They brought her to the beach in silence, laying her on a tarpaulin near the waterline until authorities arrived. That night, resort staff and guests gathered quietly. Candles were set in the sand, their flames flickering against the breeze, while flowers were placed in a line near the water's edge. The event was not marked by press conferences or cameras, only subdued grief from strangers who had witnessed the violence firsthand. In the following days, a short advisory cautioned visitors to avoid murky water near river mouths, but the story faded from attention. Thanks for watching. If these stories of people ending in the hands of apex predators entertained you, click here for more.